Just to get it on the record, Scott, if this came up and there was a real attempt to give Trump a third term, would you be for it or against it?
I'm long on the record of opposing violating the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution.
So you would call up Trump if he is considering this and tell him this is a bad idea?
If he asked me, I would tell him you can't do this.
In today's video, Abby Phillip destroys MAGA pundit Scott Jennings on Newsnight with Abby Phillip after he tries to defend Steve Bannon's outrageous claim that Donald Trump could run for a third term in 2028. Abby doesn't hold back. She presses Scott on the 22nd Amendment, exposing how dangerous this kind of rhetoric is for democracy, while Scott scrambles to justify Trump's allies just joking. Abby points out that, trolling or not, these statements can actually erode trust in America's institutions and embolden extremists. The exchange gets heated fast, with Abby forcing Scott to finally admit that even Trump's own justices wouldn't back such a move. So let's dive in and watch how Abby Phillip shuts down Scott Jennings on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
I've covered Steve Bannon long enough to know you don't just flip off what he is saying. Do you think that this is actually something that they're going to try to attempt, and should they?
No. I mean, Bannon has no formal involvement with the Trump White House, and if you look at all the stories, the White House declined to comment. The White House rarely declines to comment, so this is him out on his own.
I would argue the White House response ought to be, no, the president is going to follow the Constitution. He will not be running for a third term.
No formal involvement.
I don't know.
With the White House. I'm going to dispute this just a little bit. The weeks leading up to January 6th, Steve Bannon was saying all hell was going to break loose if Donald Trump was not necessarily, they didn't certify the results for Donald Trump. Look at what happened. We had an insurrection. Since then, and I mentioned, and as I will, as much as I can, is he has not only pardoned 1,600 people that are out on the loose and waiting for their orders. And when Steve Bannon says that Donald Trump is potentially going to serve another term, he is sending a signal not only to those 1,600 people that rioted and caused an insurrection at the Capitol, but all of MAGA. And so my hope is that we will have a Supreme Court that will end up stopping this. But I actually think that Steve Bannon truly believes that this is the case, and he is sending a signal to MAGA that Donald Trump should be the president of the United States in 2028.
Let me play, you brought up the Supreme Court. I'm going to play for you what Amy Coney Barrett said in an interview recently when she was asked about this issue. Listen.
The 22nd Amendment says you can only run for office for 2 terms.
True.
You think that that's cut and dry?
Well, that's what the amendment says, right? After FDR had 4 terms, that's what that amendment says.
She sounds like someone who thinks that this will come before the court and doesn't explain more on the legal sort of underpinning of this.
Well, there's not much to explain. It's pretty clear. I mean, you can't.
I agree.
So I don't know why you would want to talk it to death.
Well, why do you think Steve Bannon keeps saying this, and that Trump keeps putting the 2028 hat on the desk and all that?
He keeps it in the on the hats and stuff because he's trolling his opponents, and he knows how crazy it drives them when.
You can really see Xochitl Hinojosa holding her ground here, and honestly, she's right to sound the alarm about Steve Bannon's influence and what his words mean beyond the surface. It's easy for people like Scott Jennings to brush this off as just trolling, but history tells us we should take these kinds of statements seriously. Before January 6th, Bannon literally said, "All hell will break loose." And that's exactly what happened. So when he now talks about Trump serving a third term, it's not just harmless chatter, it's conditioning supporters to believe that breaking constitutional limits could somehow be justified. The 22nd Amendment couldn't be clearer. No president can serve more than 2 terms. But what makes this discussion dangerous is that people like Bannon and other MAGA influencers are testing how far they can push the narrative before it becomes normalized. That's how democracy erodes, not overnight, but through repeated challenges that make the unthinkable start to sound possible. And Xochitl is absolutely right to connect this rhetoric to a broader threat. Trump and his allies have already shown a pattern of undermining democratic institutions, from questioning elections to pressuring officials to overturn results. Bannon's words aren't random. They're a strategic message to Trump's base, including those who were pardoned after January 6th. It's a signal that the movement isn't over. While Scott tries to dismiss it as just political noise, Xochitl recognizes that language is power, and when extremists use it to stir loyalty over law, that's when democracy truly stands on shaky ground.
He does these kinds of things. Bannon, I don't know. I don't know him personally. I don't know him well at all. Maybe he believes this. Maybe he doesn't. I just know what the Constitution says. I know what most Republicans would think about it, and I know what the Supreme Court would do about it. So I don't really think this is serious.
Just to get it on the record, Scott, if this came up and there was a real attempt to give Trump a third term, would you be for it or against it?
I'm long on the record of opposing violating the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution.
This is kind of interesting. You know, Maggie Haberman, she's covered Trump for a very long time, so she understands how this works. And she agrees with you on the trolling. She says he clearly enjoys knowing that it bothers Democrats that he says this, and there's a trolling aspect to it. But the thing with all of his trolls is they start out that way, like Canada as a 51st state, and then he socializes them. They take on a life of their own, or he breathes more life into them. I've covered Trump as well. She is right about that. Steve Bannon is not in the White House, but he's constantly speaking directly to Trump, to people around Trump. These things do take on a life of their own in Trump's own mind. And often that is all that is needed, the permission structure, to figure out one way or another how to make things happen.
I mean, they've already pretty much understood what the vulnerable points are when it comes to the institutions. As I continue to say, the institutions are only going to work if the people within them are willing to defend them. And considering that he put together this Supreme Court, and he did it for a very specific reason, because he knows the things that he tries to do that are outside the lines, that if it gets there, he understands that he has crafted the perfect scenario, and it's checkmate. And so, like, for people to take this seriously, I think we absolutely should. And I'm sorry, I don't understand this game that we play with him. Is like, oh, when he says things that are very dangerous, he's kidding. But then when he actually does it, it's like, oh, I guess he meant it. It's like, I'm not going to play the whole what does he mean game and, oh, he's just trolling, when he has shown time and again that he's very serious about the things that he's.
Abby Phillip and Jemele Hill are both done playing this he's just trolling game. And honestly, they're right. Every time Trump says something extreme, his defenders laugh it off as a joke until suddenly it's not. That's how we got January 6th. Something that started as rhetoric turned into a violent reality. Scott Jennings tries to sound reasonable by pointing to the Constitution and saying it can't happen, but Abby and Jemele are focusing on something deeper. The fact that Trump has already shown he's willing to test the limits of democracy itself. When Jemele points out that Trump handpicked his Supreme Court for a reason, she's highlighting a truth people often ignore. Trump doesn't just push chaos for fun. He's strategic about surrounding himself with loyalists who will protect him. That's not trolling. That's premeditated. And Abby's absolutely right that institutions only work if the people inside them defend them. The Constitution is just words on paper if those in power stop respecting it. What Abby and Jemele are both warning about is normalization, the danger of brushing off authoritarian behavior until it becomes standard. Trump admires dictators for a reason. They don't leave power willingly. And when you mix that mindset with a loyal base that's been told the system is corrupt, it's a recipe for disaster. Scott wants to believe it's all harmless political theater, but Abby and Jemele see the pattern, the testing of limits, the shifting of norms, and the slow erosion of accountability. And they're absolutely right. The real danger isn't just in what Trump says, it's in how easily people keep pretending he doesn't mean it.
Says. Well, everything is a test.
Yeah.
And he's just going to continually see how far he can get with everything and just see how far he can go. And yeah, considering how hard it was to get him out of the White House before, why do we think that this would be any different? We see who he admires. He admires dictators. The dictators don't leave. So, like, why would we think that he was joking?
What does this say about the support for like a J.D. Vance, who's widely seen as perhaps the next person in line, that someone like Steve Bannon continues to suggest that it's not going to be the next guy. It's not going to be Don Jr. or J.D. Vance. It has to be Trump. Let me just play a little bit more from this interview with The Economist where Bannon kind of expounds on that.
The only way President Trump wins in 2028 and continues to stay in office is by the will of the American people, okay? And the will of the American people is what the Constitution embodies. And so I think we're going to be in good hands there. We need to finish what we started. And President Trump is the instrument, a providential instrument to finish that, to finish this job.
Lydia, if you're J.D. Vance, what are you thinking right now?
I think he thinks that Steve Bannon is trolling. I don't think he takes this seriously the way that we are at this table. That's just the reality. And even Bannon said he thinks it's the will of the people. If the will of the people is clearly not supporting that whatsoever.
The Republicans need to speak out, and I'm not sure we are going to get Republicans actually telling Trump this is not a good idea, or Steve Bannon. And I think that's
Trump is not saying it's a good idea. I mean, he said just a few weeks ago, I'm not running in 20. I mean, he's
it's
poo-pooed
a clickbait
this.
headline.
He has poo-pooed this.
But you would call up Trump if he is considering this and tell him this is a bad idea.
If he asked me, I would tell him, you can't do this.
You can clearly see Jemele Hill's frustration as she calls out the dangerous game being played whenever Trump makes outrageous or authoritarian remarks. She points out how people often brush it off as trolling or just kidding, only for him to later act on those same statements. Hill refuses to play that game anymore, reminding everyone that Trump has repeatedly proven he's serious about testing limits and seeing how far he can push the boundaries of democracy. She emphasizes that everything he says is a test, a way to measure how much resistance he'll face, and based on how hard it was to remove him from office the first time, there's no reason to believe it would be any easier if he tried again. Her warning is chilling but realistic. Trump admires dictators, and dictators don't leave voluntarily. So why should anyone think he's joking about staying in power? The discussion takes a sharper turn when Steve Bannon is brought up, with clips showing him describing Trump as a providential instrument meant to finish the job. That kind of language paints Trump not as a politician but as a messianic figure destined to rule, an idea that fuels the cult-like devotion among his followers. Xochitl Hinojosa then delivers a powerful reality check, noting that Republican figures like J.D. Vance probably view Bannon's talk as trolling, but she stresses that this dismissal is exactly the problem. It normalizes dangerous rhetoric and allows anti-democratic ideas to spread unchecked. She adds that the will of the people Bannon invokes simply doesn't support these fantasies, and yet most Republicans remain silent. Even as Trump publicly downplays these ideas, Hinojosa points out that few within his party have the courage to tell him this is wrong. And in the end, that silence, that refusal to confront him, might be what poses the greatest threat to democracy itself. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.